of the executive panel of the North Wales Fire and Rescue Authority. Can I welcome you all to the meeting? And can I remind you that because it's a virtual meeting that will be recorded, that you, to speak, you need to raise your virtual hand. And if I don't spot you, just wave your normal hand furiously, and hopefully I will then ensure that you do get to speak. I have had representations from both members and officers that we changed the order of the agenda this afternoon, and I will be doing that. So after we've dealt with the minutes of the last meeting, we will then we will take item 14, new training centre, and then item 13, the medium-term financial strategy and the budget, in that order, before continuing with the rest of the agenda items. So starting with the first agenda item, which is apologies. We've had apologies from Councillor Rob Triggs and Councillor Rondo Roberts. Is anybody aware of any other apologies today? No? Okay, so going on to item 2, which is declaration of interests. Are there any declarations of interest from any member, please? No? So going on to item 3, which is notice of urgent matters. I haven't received any notification of any urgent matters, so there's nothing under that item. So we go on to item 4, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of July. And we'll take those in terms of accuracy to begin with. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Nobody's got anything to raise in terms of inaccuracy. Can I have somebody to propose that we accept the minutes in that case, please? Councillor Gareth Roberts, Diolch yn fawr. Can I have a seconder, please? I'm looking around for a seconder.
I'll second those, Chair.
That's great. Thank you very much, Carol. Can you show that you're all in agreement, please? Thank you very much. That's passed. So going on to matters arising from the minutes. Anything on page 1? Anything on page 2? I think that the Chief wants to come in on item 6. Chief?
Thank you, Chair. Pnawn da, pawb. Yes, the resolution regarding the broadening the role presentation was that correspondence should be prepared for the Deputy Minister and it should incorporate the views of members at that last meeting. So the views of members were that we would welcome to consider broadening the role, but only if it was not to the detriment of the current role of firefighters and their training. And that was submitted in a letter. And then subsequently, the Chair and myself met in person with the Deputy Minister and her advisors at RIL, and we discussed the matter further. And then she presented an oral statement commending to the Senedd the recent thematic review from her Fire and Rescue Advisor on training matters, and that she asked that the 3 fire and rescue services in Wales should report back to her on what we anticipated to do in relation to the recommendations, both in that first review around capacity for broadening the role and the second review into training. We have subsequently presented that action plan, and she has written to commend the work that we're doing in that matter. So that's my update. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chief. And just to confirm that the Minister has acknowledged our good progress in this area. I'm just reading from a letter that she sent me on the 6th of December, and it says it was encouraging to see that an action plan has been developed by your Fire and Rescue Service to set out the activity it proposes to take against each of the recommendations. So that's good news. The Minister appears to be pleased with what we're doing in North Wales. Going on to page 3 of the minutes, any matters arising there? No, so I think we've accepted the minutes from the last meeting. So going on to the next agenda item, as I say, I want to take as the next agenda item, item number 14, which is the new training centre. And I'm going to invite Deputy Chief Fire Officer Stuart Forshaw to present that item. Thank you, Stuart.
Diolch. Good afternoon, everybody. As the Chair says, this report is regarding the new training centre, and it presents members with an update on the work undertaken to date on the production of a detailed business case for the options of a new training development centre in North Wales Fire and Rescue Service. The authority is committed to the provision of essential operational training to its staff to support service delivery and also firefighter safety. The Chief Fire Officer's assessment undertaken during 2021 identified training as a priority area, and the authority approval was given to undertake a full review on the future delivery of operational training and development in the service. This has included a review of current operational training facilities in the service, including those located at Dolgellau and real fire stations, and also the firehouse training facility at Dolgellau Fire Station continues to be used for operational training. Though it requires a significant investment to extend its medium-term lifespan for risk-critical breathing apparatus and firefighting tactics training. It's also located, as you know, in an area of North Wales, which is a considerable distance for the majority of our staff to travel and attend current training courses. During the past decade, the authority will also have noted the number of fires and other emergency incidents have reduced significantly. Although this is a success story for fire prevention work that has taken place in our communities during this time, it has resulted in the risk of firefighters having less exposure to the hazards and complex situations they are likely to face when attending such incidents. Fire contaminants is also a health and safety risk for firefighters present in the smoke and toxic flammable gases released during fires and may contribute to cancer and other health conditions. So the management of fire contaminants needs to be included in training and development centre design, operational procedures, and also fire and rescue service culture. To mitigate these risks, operational training and development for our staff in realistic and immersive training environments, which include adequate health and safety measures, needs to be at the forefront of a new training centre development design. This will provide essential facilities required for training and development for at least the next 25 years in North Wales Fire and Rescue Service. Therefore, the need to invest in training and development facilities to ensure operational preparedness and safety, both in terms of existing and future provision, and in particular, the need to provide practical and immersive training experience across a range of training scenarios, will require investment in new training facilities. The review of operational training facilities in the service also supports the recent findings of the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor's thematic review of operational training within the Welsh Fire and Rescue Services, which recognises the need, the requirements for significant capital investments to replicate real-world conditions for firefighters to develop and refresh their skills in the training environment. So following the approval by the Fire Authority at its meeting on the 17th of October this year, to allocate a budget for the development of a detailed business case for the new training and development centre, the new training centre project team consulted with staff, building construction professionals, sustainability experts, and an architect to develop a high-level design for the new training and development centre in North Wales. This has also included the identification of a piece of land assessed as being suitable regarding geographical location and size. The next stage of the development of the business case includes entering into an exclusivity agreement with the landowner, so the required due diligence can take place prior to recommending and seeking any approval from the Fire Authority for land purchase. It is anticipated that the next phase of the project, which includes entering into a land exclusivity agreement and pre-purchase site surveys, will be concluded by the 31st of March 2023. Following this phase, the results of the site surveys and pre-planning applications at the local planning office will be reviewed, and recommendations for site purchase may be presented to the meeting of the Fire Authority on the 17th of April 2023, dependent on the outcomes. Therefore, the inclusion of a budget to purchase land from April 2023 will be presented to members as part of the 23-24 budget setting process, although formal approval by the authority will be sought following the conclusion of the due diligence included in the exclusivity agreement works. Separate to the purchase of the land, the detailed business case for the new training development centre is scheduled to be completed for July 2023 and will be brought to members for further scrutiny and approval at that time. Following approval of the business case proposals, a detailed timetable will be developed, although it is envisaged that building work could commence during an early part of 2025, following the planning application, detailed design brief development and procurement of a main contractor. Members, of course, will be kept updated, informed on progress of the project as it developed during these preceding months. So, Chair, the recommendations is that members note the background to review of the training provision included in the Chief Fire Advisor for Wales Thematic Review. Note that the current training provision is reaching the end of its life. Endorse the inclusion of a budget for the purchase of land in the 23-24 budget setting, noting that this will be subject to separate approval following the conclusion of due diligence. And also note that the timescale set out in this report for the provision of a detailed business case for members' consideration. Diolch yn fawr, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart, for that overview. And members will be aware that I have mentioned that I've actually visited the training centre at Dolgellau, and as is pointed out in the report, it is unfortunately reaching the end of its life, and it's not a viable resource in terms of going forward into the future. So I'm going to invite members for comments and questions. Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. It was an excellent report. I think it's incumbent on us as a fire authority to provide our firefighters with the best possible means of training, Chair. In my experience as a former firefighter, things have changed in the time since I left the job. But I was also a BA instructor. I was a general instructor in the training school at RIL. And I feel that we should give our firefighters the best training with the best facilities that we can really have. So, you know, I think it's an important thing. And I know you've been to Dolgellau, Chair, and you didn't, you know, the facilities there are not up to standard or to the standard that they should be. So, you know, thank you for the report, Stuart.
Thank you, Paul. Anybody else with any comments or questions? I can't see any hands raised. In that case, can I ask somebody to propose the recommendations? Councillor Gareth Roberts, thank you. And Councillor Dale Sylvester, thank you. So we have a proposer and seconder. Can you show that you support the recommendations, please? Thank you. Before we move on, David, I see that you had your hand raised. Did you want to come in?
Yes, just to point out that while I fully understand the need for a training centre, it doesn't come free, and the implications of this are set out in the following item. So I'm sure you'll have read the budget item and have had some discussions around that recently. But you know, we don't get this for nothing, and it's I think it's 3 million for the site, which we're now putting into the budget for next year if you approve this, really.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, and that's why I wanted to deal with this item first, and then we now go on to the actual budget. But before we do, Councillor Chris Hughes, did you want to come in? I can see a virtual hand next to Councillor Chris Hughes. I'm not sure if he wants to come in or not.
I do apologise, Chair. I have to leave I've got to leave my video off because I keep breaking up. I have to be honest, I'm going to be voting against the budget, and on that basis, I'm struggling with this. The proposed increase amounts to some 13.5%, when local government, the indication to local government is that they'll be looking at around a 3.2% increase from the Welsh Government, based on the fact that Welsh Government have had a 3.2% increase in their revenue budget. In terms of Conway, that means that over the next 2 years, Conway will have to find savings, cuts to its services of £40 million, placing it in real danger of going into registering a 114 notice. On that basis, I can't support this budget, this proposal, Chair.
Okay, thanks for that, Chris, because we are obviously going to be discussing the budget as the next item, but we need to actually deal with this item first of all. And obviously, if you feel that you need to vote against it, that's fine, as indeed any other member can. But we have had a proposer and seconder, so I'm going to ask for a vote on the proposal and the seconder in terms of the recommendations that we have before us. So if you support the recommendations for the new training centre, will you indicate by raising your hand, please?
Oh.
Okay, and I take it, Lisa, that you'll be making a note of that show of hands. And if you're voting against, can I ask you to indicate if you're voting against the proposal for the new training centre, please? So, Councillor Chris Hughes, Councillor Gareth Sandilands. I can see you putting their hands up. Councillor Alan Hughes. Is there anybody else that I've missed?
No, I was just putting, I wanted to ask a question, sorry. There's no option to defer this till the budget.
I was going to ask the same question, actually. Put an option up to put my hand up.
I know that that's going to be an option we're going to consider on the budget, but this is a separate item. But if somebody wants to propose that we also defer the decision or the recommendations in relation to this item, then I'm happy to take an amendment so we can vote on the amendment. Does somebody want to propose that as an amendment?
Can I propose that we look to amend it, subject to time availability, delay the implementation of the centre? We've got some serious times coming up, and depending on what's said on the next item, it's the chicken and egg, unfortunately. You have to understand, Chair. Yes, I do understand Paul's concerns about getting the best training, but I also have to understand that it is one of the biggest items that we could save for a later stage. We're facing in Denbighshire, many millions of pounds in cuts, and this will affect people's what people have to spend. So we need to look at our cost savings as a thyroid authority, and this is the biggest cost saving we could achieve at this moment. So I think a bit more looking into the detail would mean that we'd have to defer it. Thank you. Okay, so I'm taking that as a proposal for an amendment. Do I have a seconder, please?
I'll propose that, Chair. I'll second it, sorry.
Thank you for that, Chris. Okay, so we'll deal with the amendment as it stands, which is that we defer making a recommendation on the new training centre as outlined in the report until the next meeting. Can I have a show of hands if you support the amendment, please? Okay, I can see, I think at 5 or 6. Can I see a show of hands if you are against the amendment? The amendment is overwhelmingly carried, so we are postponing making a decision on the recommendations on the report. So we now go on to item 13, which is the medium-term financial strategy and budget. And I'm going to invite David as the Treasurer to introduce this item. Diolch yn fawr, David.
Diolch, Cadeirydd. Na I ofyn I Helen gyflwyno gynta. Mae gen I hi slides wneith I rannu ar y sgrin. Awn ni drwy heini efo Helen. A os gael ddod fewn I ddeud chydig eiriau ar ddiwedd cyflwyniad Helen, os gwelwch yn dda.
Champion, diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, David, and prynhawn dda Dal.
PALB. This agenda item relates to the authority's medium-term financial plan, and that covers the period the 1st of April 2023 through to the 31st of March 2026. It also introduces the revenue and capital budgets for 2023-24, and certainly in the previous item we've already touched on some of the challenges that we're facing. By way of background for members, you will recall that the approval of the budget and the medium-term financial plan are reserved matters for the full Fire and Rescue Authority. Therefore, today, you're not being asked to approve the budget, but to note the approach that we're taking to our planning, and also which enables you to ask those questions before it progresses to the full Fire Authority meeting in January 2023 for consideration. So I think a lot of the questions that you asked today are very valid, and in between now and the full Fire Authority, that will give you the opportunity to understand the budget in more detail. The paper itself builds on the budget paper that was approved by the authority at its meeting in October, and that was the budget planning assumptions that we've used. Those budget planning assumptions confirmed that the budget would be predicated on our existing service delivery models. And you'll be aware from the members' planning days that that relates to our operational response, our prevention work, and our protection work. It also confirmed that the priorities would include those identified by the Chief Fire Officer in her situational assessment in September 2021. And I'll remind members of those. It was really a focus on availability to ensure that that fire cover was available across all of our communities in North Wales, that the provision of training for our staff met the required standard and was fully compliant with the health and safety regulations, and also that we got that corporate capacity that was so vital during the COVID outbreak. In addition to that, the paper that went to members in October identified the key risks and uncertainties that we were facing at that time. And in particular, it was noted that pay inflation was a significant unknown. At that time, the pay settlements for 2022-23 were outstanding, and definitely those for 2023-24. Since that time, the pay settlement for the local government staff has been agreed, and that gave a one-off payment of £1,925, and for us that equated to approximately 6%. The pay position for firefighters remains unclear. The last offer was a 5% offer, and that was rejected, and the firefighters are currently out to ballot on strike action. So I'm sure you will appreciate that that makes planning for next year incredibly challenging. Alongside that, it's not just about pay inflation, it's about significant inflationary pressures as well as supply chain difficulties. I am sure, though, that members will note that the challenges we're facing as an authority are wholly consistent, not only with other public sector bodies, but also private businesses, as well as individuals, as the cost of living crisis deepens. It's fully anticipated that between now and the Fire Authority in January, there will be further opportunities for you as members to understand the budget in more detail, understand the imperatives. In addition to that, we'll be working with representatives from local authority chief execs and also leaders to ensure that the challenges being faced by the Fire Authority are fully understood. The paper within the agenda pack today provides the proposed medium-term financial plan and budget. And it's actually the culmination of about 3 months of planning by my colleagues within the service leadership team. I do have a short presentation, and I'm hoping today to be able to provide you with the key elements that you may wish to consider, and also raise any queries that you may have. I'm going to attempt to share my screen, which has worked previously, so fingers crossed. Share screen. If you wouldn't mind confirming when you can see that, that would be very helpful. Excellent. I can see a thumbs up. Thank you very much. So the first slide, this is a very high level position and really breaks down our expenditure between the two main headings, pay and non-pay. And as you can see, the total budget provision for 2022-23
is £39.4 million. And I think it's worth noting that this was approved by members last December. So the planning for that budget started in about June, July time. And at that time, our planning assumption was that pay would have a 2% increase year on year. And at that time, general inflation was running at below 4%. The budget was also set on the back of COVID. And I think our assumption at that time would be that the COVID restrictions would be lifted. And it was also assumed that the COVID impact would reduce and that a degree of normality would return. It's also worth noting that traditionally the fire budget is actually set ahead of the local authority budgets. So we set our budget in December in order that we can get our figures into the planning assumptions of the local authorities. Normally, that's not problematic, but certainly last year, by the time that the local authority budgets were set, it was clear that the settlement from the Welsh Government included inflationary pressures, which we hadn't built into our base budget. It's fair to say, though, that the global position since that time has deteriorated markedly. We've got unrest in Ukraine, ongoing supply chain issues, huge levels of inflation, increases in interest rates, and the energy crisis. And that energy crisis is as relevant to us as an organisation as it is to individuals. I think what's important for us is that the planning assumptions that we made for the budget have deteriorated with pay inflation, which I've already spoken about. Our interest rates have increased from about 1% up to 5%, and that's not for future borrowing, that's for existing borrowing. And also we've had a significant challenge in respect of our energy costs. Consequently, the budget proposal for 2023-24 is 44.72 million, and that's a year-on-year increase of 5.32. And we are cognizant of the impact of that. It includes 3.27 million for pay and 2 million for non-pay. What I hope to be able to do over the following slides is to provide further insight into those challenges, to provide yourselves as members with a greater awareness and understanding. We do recognise that we serve the communities of North Wales, and actually the costs of our service do fall to our council tax and our communities. So this slide aims to really translate that budget into the cost per head of population. So as you can see, from 2022-23, the cost was £56.03, and that increases by about 13.5%. To £63.59 in 2023-24. It is a significant increase, and that in part picks up the issues from 2022-23. I think it's important for members that you are aware of when we started the budget setting, what planning assumptions we made. I've already confirmed that our planning assumption was that we carried on with our existing service delivery model, and that's consistent with our corporate plan, and also that we continue to focus on those priorities identified by the Chief Fire Officer. So when we started this work, we already knew that we had to resolve the 2022-23 pay awards, and those are still very much outstanding for firefighters. In addition to that, we had to make some assumptions around pay awards. Both David and I met with the Directors of Finance from other local authorities in North Wales, and this is clearly a common challenge that we all have. And so, for awareness really, the medium-term financial plan that we put to members last year assumed pay growth of 2%. The budget that we're presenting today puts a more realistic figure on that. It's currently included at 5%, but at this moment, we don't know what those figures might be. We also had to build in the energy costs. These are unavoidable to us. We have about 51 buildings, and the vast majority of those are operational fire stations. The energy cost for us this year put a cost pressure in of just under £1 million. The element of our budget of non-pay is quite low. It's only just over 13.5 million. But what we had to do is build in an understanding of that inflationary risk. So identifying those that were exceptional, such as energy costs, we then had to base the budget on best estimates. And certainly my colleagues within the service leadership team have actually reviewed each and every budget to identify, is it essential? If we don't do it, what are the risks? And are there any options to either defer this spend or stop it altogether? Worth noting that we haven't put within the budget specific provision for the environmental projects. We do have a 2030 target for being carbon neutral, and it's correct to say that when we do undertake our procurement now, we're always mindful of the environmental impact. But what we haven't done is brought cost into the budget for specific schemes to reduce down our carbon footprint. For me, this is probably one of the most important slides, because what it attempts to do is actually provide that reconciliation, the reconciliation between the budget that was approved by members last year through to the budget that's being proposed this year. And as you can see, that starting point was £39.4 million. Pay is our largest item of spend. So it's at 70%. We always have to put a pay assumption in there about the uplift. It's ideal if we know about it before the start of the financial year, but more often than not, we don't. So our original planning assumption was a 2% pay award, which would have given us an increase of about £500,000. As you can see from this slide, that planning assumption no longer holds true. So what we now have is a cost pressure based on our planning assumptions of 1.7 million. And what that picks up is the local government pay settlement above 2% this year. And it also includes the financial impact of the latest offer to firefighters, which was 5%, and then builds on that. That is a recurring cost pressure for which we've had to increase the pay assumption for 2023-24. Alongside that, the review of training has identified two things. It's identified that our capacity to train is somewhat limited. And it was also identified that our retained personnel, who, as you'll be aware, for whom we're secondary employers, it's also identified that we need to make increased provision for their training. So the cost pressure of 350,000 is specifically in relation to that need to train in the core competencies. In addition to that, you can see there's a budget pressure of 520,000, which relates to operational resilience. And there's a number of factors within that. The first one is that need to build in additional availability, and that's within our retained cohort. The second one relates to an aging workforce. And when a firefighter retires, we generally are unable to recruit fully competent firefighters, because if we recruit, they're generally recruited from another service. So actually, employing somebody today, it will take approximately 18 months for that person to become operationally competent. So within the budget, we've recognised that we've a number of retirements, and we've built provision to bring people in to start their development. Then the third aspect of that within the operational resilience is making that provision for wildfires. What we know from spate conditions is that our staff will spend a lot of time on mountainsides, and the kit that we've currently got is very heavy. So within that operational resilience budget, there is provision for additional wildfire kit as well. I think the one thing that COVID taught us was the need to ensure that you've got that corporate resilience and that capacity. There's an increase in the budget of 100,000, and that is to ensure that we've got corporate resilience in a number of key areas: health and safety, procurement, environmental challenges, data protection, data analytics, corporate planning. So really that is the additional cost of ensuring that corporate capacity exists. And to put that into context, we have across the organisation a significant number of staff who do an excellent job, but they are a team of one. And therefore that capacity in the event of sickness or a retirement is very, very limited. The business fire safety budget is as a consequence of our capacity to respond to the regulatory changes arising from Grenfell. We're going to have additional responsibilities, and it's important that we've got the right staff and that they're adequately trained. I've already spoken about the energy costs. The cost to us is an estimate of £890,000. We cannot be guaranteed that we're going to get support from the government in terms of the energy cap. So therefore, we've put the current cost. If we had to purchase our electricity and gas today, that is what the year-on-year cost pressure would be. I spoke also of the interest rate increases. This time last year, we would have borrowed at about 1%. Our borrowing rate today is about 5.2%. And therefore, there is a need to increase the budget to service our existing loans. £150,000 relates to the capital charges to a land purchase. And when we pick up the capital programme, if members do approve it, that the scheme to purchase land to build a new training centre, that's not committing to a specific training centre, but the land itself would result in a cost of £150,000. And then the remaining figure are other inflationary pressures that we're experiencing across our procurement. And that's everything from supply chain difficulties relating to our PPE through to sort of supply chain inflation as well. So that's a sort of a broad brush reconciliation between last year's budget and this year's budget. And I hope we'll provide members with some assurance of some of the areas that we've looked at to ensure that we're clear in our minds about what is driving that year-on-year increase. We've touched on capital, and I note that capital is not a free good, and there's two sides to the capital. The first aspect of the capital is how we fund it, and we generally fund our capital programme through borrowing. And the second aspect of that is the charge to revenue for the depreciation. So if we buy a fire appliance today, we use it for 15 years, it's depreciated over 15 years. It's a really tough challenge, because part of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is ensuring that we've got that stability. So there's a couple of areas where we might think, do you know what, we're not going to replace the training tower, or we won't undertake those minor works in the buildings, but it's a knock-on effect of that. So the budget proposal at the present time includes £3 million for the land purchase for the training centre, but it also includes another of key elements. So the command and control system upgrade is a fundamental system. It enables us to mobilise our fire appliances. So when somebody telephones 999, the command and control system is absolutely core to that mobilisation. You'll see in there's a number of fleet replacements, and they range from fire appliances. They have a finite life of about 15 years. And in part, that isn't because the fire appliance reaches 15 years and it's no longer any good. Part of it is about the provision of spare parts and the ability to maintain it. We also have multi-purpose station vans, and they're the vehicles used by our protection and prevention teams to actually get out into our communities. Sitting alongside that, you will see specialist vehicles. Those specialist vehicles relates to a welfare unit. So our crews now, it's not uncommon for them to spend their shift on the side of a mountain. On the side of a mountain, there are no welfare facilities, or indeed if they attend a major incident at, say, an industrial site, we're not guaranteed that there will be adequate facilities. So the amount in the budget is very much for the well-being and health and safety of our crews. Sitting alongside that, you'll see training towers. Our training towers are the steel, generally they're the steel buildings that you'll see sat in the corner of a drill ground. And we have a replacement programme that ensures that they're inspected every year, they're maintained as appropriate. Very often that's painting them to elongate the life. But sadly, because we are very close to the sea, we have to have a period of replacement. And you will see that there's also a rollover from this year's plan into next year's.
Helen, just before you move forward, the dates at the top of those columns, The first one is 23-24 and the second one 23-24. Is the first one supposed to be 22-23?
No, I'm terribly sorry. The first one is 23-24. The second one should be 24-25, and the last one should be 25-26. It's the next 3 years. Apologies.
Thank you.
And then the very last slide that I have really is the impact for our local authority colleagues. So as you can see, the budget is broadly it's split according to head of population. And the population of North Wales that we're using is just over 704,000, and therefore the charge to each local authority is based on the population. The overall increase is 13.5%, and you will notice from this last column that the increase fluctuates around that. And so if you can take Gwynedd, which has an increase of 13.6%, that is because the population of Gwynedd has increased year on year, where perhaps as a proportion of the whole, whereas perhaps Anglesey has reduced. I don't know if David wants me to stop sharing my slides, but I'm happy to either hand over to David or indeed take any questions.
Can we go back to slide 5 for a moment, please, Helen?
Yeah.
Da chi'n fodlon i mi ddweud gair rwan, Cadeirydd?
Croeso, cerwch ymlaen, David.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Ia, da ni gyd yn ymwybodol bod arweinyddion y cynghorau wedi cael gwynt o'r cynnydd 13% yma a di cwrdd Pnawn Dydd Gwener ar derfyn cyfarfod bwrdd uchelgais i drafod yn anffurfiol.
Sorry, David, sorry, I'm getting one of the members saying there's no translation coming through.
Ydy rhywun arall yn clywed y cyfeithiad?
Sorry, David, I'm not on mute. I can actually. Apologies, I was raising my thumb. Yes, I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear.
Neu gario ymlaen gan obeithio bod pawb yn clywed i felly. Ie, dwi'n meddwl bod ni'n ymwybodol mae arweinyddion y 6 cyngor wedi cwrdd Pnawn Dydd Gwener ar derfyn yn anffurfiol ar derfyn cyfarfod bwrdd uchelgais i drafod y cynnydd 13% yma. Ac wrth gwrs mae cynnydd o'r maint yna'n rhywbeth sy'n anodd iawn i sefydlogi o safbwynt y cynghora sir sy'n gorfod ffactorio hyn i fewn i'w cyllideb â nhw ar flwyddyn lle mae'n anodd iawn i falansio'r gyllideb.
Sorry, David, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to step in because there's at least one member who's not receiving translation, possibly 2. Lisa, are we able to check what's happening with the translation, please, before David continues?
Could we just...
Sorry, I was just going to say you need to click interpretation in your barrel on the bottom and select English. Has everybody done that?
I have to own up that I initially picked Welsh, so possibly others might have done the same.
No, I'm getting in the chat that some have already done that, but they're still not getting the translation, unfortunately.
Yeah.
If people are on an iPad, they may have to click the 3 dots in the top right for more, and then a drop down should offer you interpretation.
I presume it should be working. If some people are getting translation, and presumably the translation should be working for everybody. Are we able to try once more, David? Diolch yn fawr.
Ie, neu drio eto, gobeithio bod pawb yn clywed hyn tro yma. Da ni wedi cael gwybodaeth dros y penwythnos bod arweinyddion y cynghora wedi clywed am y cynnydd 13%. A di trafod o'r derfyn, trafod o'r anffurfiol ar derfyn cyfarfod bwrdd uchelgais Pnawn Dydd Gwener. Ac yn amlwg wedi cysylltu efo rhai ohonoch chi fel aelodau o'r awdurdod tân. Maen nhw wedi gofyn am ohirio, ond does dim diben ag angen gohirio, dwi'n credu. Mae yna amserlen statudol, mae rhaid i ni gyrraedd i osod y gyllideb ar ardoll, ac dwi'n meddwl bod rhaid i ni fynd ymlaen ar y 6 ar 10 o Ionawr. Y 6 ar 10 ydy o, dwi'n siŵr bod yr argymhelliad yn sôn am 17 Ionawr, ond 16 Ionawr mae'r cyfarfod lle fyddwch chi'n penderfynu ar y gyllideb. Mae'r penderfyniad adeg hynny a gymhelliad oedden ni'n gofyn am heddiw, ond efallai oedden ni'n symud i nodi y sefyllfa heddiw gyda bwriad i drafod ymhellach cyn Ionawr. Mae'r deadline mwy cynnar yna, mwy cynnar na'r awdurdodau lleol. Maen nhw'n ffactorio hyn i fewn i'n cyllidebau nhw ac yn gwneud penderfyniadau ar gyllideb a traeth cyngor yn Chwefror a Mawrth. Ac mae'r amserlen cynnar i'r awdurdod tân yn rhannol wrth raidd y cynnydd chwyddiant dwbl mas eleni. Mae hynny ar i chi fel awdurdod mwy na lai gytuno ar y gyllideb yn Rhagfyr dwytha am eleni, ac wedyn penderfynu'n derfynol ar hynny yn ganol Ionawr. Wel, ar ôl hynny, mi o'n ddatblygiadau byd eang yn sgil y rhyfel yn Rwsia a'r Ukraine, yr effaith gath hynny ar brisiau ynni a tanwydd, a'r disgwyliadau wedyn am gynnydd mewn cyflogau oherwydd y costau byw hynny. Mae disgwyliadau o gynnydd mewn chwyddiant tal yn llawer uwch na be oedd wedi rhagweld adeg yma llynedd. Yn hynny o beth, os ydych chi'n gweld y tabl yna ar rhan 14 o'r adroddiad ag ar y sgrin o'ch blaenau chi, mae'r eitemau cyntaf yna, yr £500,000 ar 1.7 miliwn, mae hynna'n 2.2 miliwn o'r cynnydd, bron tua hanner y cynnydd o 5 miliwn sy'n y gyllideb. A chwyddiant tal yna'n hollol anorfod, sgynnoch chi ddim grym i ddylanwadu rhyw lawer ar hynny, ac maen nhw'n gytundebau tal cenedlaethol. Wedyn mae hynny'n hollol anorfod. Yn ystod y cyfnod Chwefror blwyddyn dwytha, pryd oedd yr awdurdod tân wedi gosod y gyllideb, dwi'n gwybod am ffaith bod nifer o'r awdurdodau lleol wedi cynyddu yr darpariaeth oedd gen nhw i fewn am gyflogau eleni, ac oedd hynny yn sgil datblygiadau yn yr Ukraine ac yn y blaen, ac yn sgil setliad oedd yr un gorau oedd ni wedi cael yn flynyddoedd fel awdurdodau lleol. Felly oedd nhw wedi gallu rhoi darpariaeth i fewn yn gyllideb eleni ar ôl i ni gael y llyfr ar y gyllideb. A mae hynny'n dal i fyny fel awdurdod tân rwan, so mae yna chwyddiant tal dwbl reit uchel uwch na mae wedi weld ers blynyddoedd yn fan'na. A hwnna di hanner y cynnydd. Os ydych chi'n sbio lawr y tabl wedyn, y big ticket items tua'r gwylod na, mae yna 890 sy'n gostau ynni, mae yna 600,000 sy'n gynnydd mewn cyfraddau llog, ac ar y gwylod chwyddiant arall o bron i 400,000. Mae heini rhwng i gilydd yn 1.9 miliwn. Da ni gyd yn gwybod, da ni fel unigolion yn wynebu chwyddiant o'r maint yna. Mae hein i gyd yn faterion sy'n hollol anochel, da ni methu osgoi hein. Mae nhw'n costau anorfod a mae rhaid i ni roed nhw'n y gyllideb. Ar ôl hynny, mae yna fanion yn y tabl yna sydd yn chlwm â gwydnwch a diogelwch y gwasanaeth. Mae yna ddadl cry dros rheini i gyd, ond mae'r rhan fwyaf o'r pwysau i gyd yn anochel oherwydd chwyddiant tal a chwyddiant arall. I bob pwrpas mae hynny'n cael ei rannu rhwng yr awdurdodau lleol, ac you can stop sharing now, Helen, if you like. Mae'r cynnydd yna yn cael ei adnabod yn rhywbeth rhwng 13.2% ac 13.6% o gynnydd ar draws y 6 awdurdod. Fel ein dweud, mi fedrwn ni fynd i ail edrych ar dipyn o hyn rhwng rwan a Ionawr, ond da ni ddim am fedru symud yn bell iawn o'r 13% na. Mae'n bosibilrwydd fedrwn ni fynd yn agosach at 10% a trafod hynny gyda arweinyddion a prif weithredwyr yr awdurdodau, ond da ni ddim am fedru symud i lawr i be oedd un o'r aelodau yn sôn yn gynharach fel rhyw gynnydd grant gen Llywodraeth Cymru o 3% neu rhywbeth. Di hynny ddim yn sicr. Os da chi'n cofio, o'n arwyddion o beth tebyg llynedd ac oedd y grant yn cynyddu dipyn go lew yn fwy llynedd. Wedyn, ein ni beidio rhedeg o flaen Covid hefyd. Ond da ni ddim am fedru ddod efo lawr i'r lefel yna. Mi nawn ni'n dda iawn i ddod â'r gyllideb i lawr i ryw gynnydd o 10% yn yr lefi. Ond mi nawn ni edrych ar hynny rhwng rwan a Ionawr, a mi nawn ni gael y drafodaeth yna gyda o leia cynrychiolwyr o arweinyddion a prif weithredwyr yr awdurdodau lleol. Gyda hynny, mae adael ein fanna, Mr Cadeirydd, ond efo'r argymhellion, mae'n debyg da ni'n symud fel y drafodaeth yn yr pwyllgor chwilio bore yma i ffwr o fod yn argymell yr gyllideb yn union fel y mae o'ch blaen chi, i fod yn nodi'r gyllideb ac yn gofyn i ni fynd i gael trafodaethau pellach.
Diolch yn fawr, David. So, Helen, can I thank you for that comprehensive presentation, and can I also thank David as the Treasurer for that overview thereafter. You did mention, David, that I think I'd summarise it as there may be a little bit of wriggle room, but not much. But what we don't have in front of us today is what the wriggle room might entail. And you've touched on the fact that this report has already been considered by the Audit Committee this morning, and that it was agreed that we would only note the report at this stage and not actually approve it in terms of the recommendations that are before us. Can I just clarify, when we talk about having further discussions, from your perspective, David, Helen, are we talking about having a further meeting of the members before the full meeting on the 16th of January, or is this just discussions between officers and chief execs and finance officers? Is there somebody able to answer that before we go to members for comments, please?
I think that would be both, but I'll leave it to perhaps Dawn might want to come in on that, or Helen.
Yes, I think it would be useful. Not only are we going to arrange to meet with leaders and the chief execs and brief them further, it might be beneficial for members if we are to arrange early in the new year a briefing day, perhaps a working group, in which we can consider this in more detail before the full Fire Authority meeting.
Thank you for that. And I think that sort of may help steer the debate as we go forward. So I'm not sure who has had his hand up first, but I'll invite Gareth Sandilands first and then Chris Hughes. Gareth, thank you.
Yeah, diolch. I thoroughly agree with the Treasurer and the Chief. We need to communicate, I think, with the leaders of the 6 authorities, the 151 officers and the chief execs in an urgent meeting before the Fire Authorities meeting in January, and go from there. And to move on, I think we should just note it for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Gareth. Chris?
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to second Gareth's proposal. I think this certainly does need relations.
I'm afraid you're breaking up, Chris. But
concerned that all the training, but I wish to second Gareth's proposal.
Thank you for that. Moving on, Councillor Paul Rogers. Paul?
Thank you, Chair. Fully support what the other two members have just said. I think there does need to be more discussions with, especially the council leaders who are clearly raising some concerns on it. I think if it was nearer 10, it could be something I was comfortable with.
Thank you for that, Paul. Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Everything, they've all said what I wanted to say. I know it's incumbent of us to do a budget, but I think, you know, I'm having a mental block at the minute, Chair. What the Welsh Government's going to give the local councils, I think if we leave it in abeyance till we see what we're getting from them. But I agree with what the two former speakers have said, Chair.
Thank you for that, Paul. Anybody else want to come in with any comments or questions? Councillor Chris Hughes, you've got your hand up still. Do you want to come back, or is that what they call a legacy hand?
It's a legacy hand, Chair. Sorry, apologies.
Thank you. I mean, I think we all know this is really difficult. We're between a rock and a hard place in terms of we're here as members of the Fire and Rescue Authority to ensure that we do our best to make sure that we have an efficient fire service here in North Wales. But we have to balance that with our responsibilities back in our own local authorities who are on their knees in terms of trying to meet the financial pressures that are being placed upon them. But I think that we're all in agreement that we need to look further at the budget and what the options are and what wriggle room there may or may not be, and for there to be more communication with our local authorities in terms of chief execs, leaders and 151 officers before we meet to ratify the budget on the 16th of January. Gareth, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, just before that, you mean it would be worth benefiting them if they were informed of how much the authority has sacrificed and cost savings they've made already, you know, just to meet the political aims and objectives, to say we have sacrificed, this is what we've done, you know, so we're not just asking for money, but we have sacrificed as well. I think that would be really well received and understood. So it's a bit of a, I think on a heads up, I think it might be worth this happening in advance in future similar discussions, because we're going to have some really tough decisions, especially next year, which we've faced deeper cuts. Certainly the biggest in Denbighshire's history we've had to predict. So I think this is not going to be the end of doing this communications. It's how we get the authorities to agree in unity in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree, Gareth, that to have more information would be helpful, and perhaps some options in terms of, well, if we reduce it by such and such a percent, you know, how much pain is there going to be, you know, and if we reduce it even further, and right down to the nuclear option. Not that we want to go down that road at all, but at least members can make informed decisions then. Deputy Chair, do you want to come back in? You're on mute, Paul.
How's that? I have unmuted myself, Chair. I think members from all the relevant authorities, and especially in Flintshire, we've been looking hard at our budgets all the way, the different scrutiny committees. You know, I'm on 2 scrutinies and I'm on planning, and the amount of work that's gone into pre-budget planning, where we can cut back, where we can do. I think the majority of the authorities have cut really down to the bone, and you know, to be expected to put an added increase on our ratepayers. You know, I'm all in favour of having a decent training centre, but you know, if it's going to put added pressures on our ratepayers, you know, as I said in the meeting when we were talking to the chief, we've got a double whammy as councillors, particularly on this committee, because you know, we've got to look after the interests of our local members, and we've got to look after the fire authority. There's a lot of hard work gone in by all the authorities to come up with ideas and where they can cut back and where they can't. But, you know, we don't know what we're going to get from Welsh Government, so let's just leave it there, Chair.
Yeah, you're quite right, Paul. I mean, we do wear two hats on this authority, but I would suggest that the bigger hat is our responsibility towards maintaining an efficient fire service. Chris, did you want to come back in?
Yes, Chair. I've listened to what people are saying, and I understand the concerns. My own authority is facing cuts of £40 million over the next 2 years. You know, I mean, anything even remotely close to double figures is not going to be welcomed within our authority. We estimate that we'll get 3.2% from Welsh Government tomorrow, also on Wednesday, and even with that, we'd be looking at a significant council tax increase, even to reach the 40 million mark. Without a double figures council tax increase, we'd be looking at close to £50 million off our budget over the next 2 years. And, you know, we can't justify it. I appreciate the fact that we all want a really well-trained fire and rescue authority. But, you know, I mean, just to put it into perspective in terms of Conway's thing, if we stop doing everything other than education and social services, we'd only cut 27 million from our budget. So, you know, that's everything, absolutely everything. And you can't do that because there are many statutory services in there. So, you know, I mean, you'd be talking about massive cuts to education and social services, which would be unpalatable for our communities. And I appreciate that the Fire and Rescue Authority needs a training centre, but children need an education, and you know, and our older people need looking after.
Thank you, Chris. I think the Chief wants to come in.
Thank you. I think what was said earlier about this is only the first year of maybe many years of reductions. It's very appropriate that we look to what is required for this financial year and then work through with members in the planning working groups next year as to a, if necessary, reshaping of the fire cover. Members will know that we are undertaking a fire cover review at the moment, and the purpose of that is to make sure that there is service provision across the whole of North Wales. But in working through that with members next year, if it is your wish that there are changes to the fire cover distribution and indeed the number of firefighters, then that is the opportunity to work through with yourselves and then to feed it through into next year's budget. And we'll be happy to work with you on that if that is what you desire.
Thank you, Chief, for that. I'm sure that there's going to be considerably more debate on this issue as we move forward, but we seem to have consensus today in terms of that we want to just note the report so that further work can be done before we make any final decisions. We've had a proposer and a seconder, which in effect is an amendment to the recommendations as they are at the moment. Can you please show if you agree with that proposal, please? And is anybody against that? No, that's been unanimously carried. Thank you, everybody, for your comments and for your feedback in relation to that very difficult item. So back to the agenda, we're going now to pick up item 6. Audit Wales is a project in terms of reducing fire alarms, and ACO Sian Morris is going to present that item, I understand. Diolch, Sian.
Sorry to disappoint you, Chair. I suppose Sian Morris isn't with us today. So I'll take it upon myself to introduce this. And we have colleagues from Audit Wales to talk through the terms of reference of their thematic review this year. And that is around reducing false alarms. So really, we're just introducing them. And I'm wondering if we could to bring in Nexul and Eros. Are you here?
Yes, we are. Thanks for the introduction, Dawn. And good afternoon, members. Eros has got a presentation. We're going to share screen, and then we'll talk through briefly the purpose of the review, and then happy to take any questions you may have at the end of that. Right.
Thank you. Has that come up, Nick?
Yes, it has. Thank you. Could you move on to the first slide, please, Eros? I just want to, with this slide, ensure that everyone attending the meeting is fully aware of our role and remit, and that will hopefully help answer any queries you may have about why we're doing this particular piece of work and the approach we're taking. So the Auditor General for Wales is an appointment that's made on an 8-year cycle, and the current Auditor General is Adrian Crompton. He's been in post since July 2018. So he's in the second half of his current term of office. Just to be clear that whilst we audit the public sector in Wales, and that includes the Welsh Government and Senedd, we are an independent body, so we're not actually covered by the direct control or management of the Welsh Government, and it's within the Auditor General's gift to determine how he undertakes his work and the area he focuses on. In terms of our coverage, we cover pretty much all of the public sector in Wales, with the exception of some elements of the police service, and that amounts to around £24 billion of taxpayers' expenditure. All our work is derived from legislation, so there are numerous pieces of legislation in place, but the three key ones that we audit against are the Public Audit Wales Act 2004, the Government of Wales Act 2006, and the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act 2015. So that defines the areas that we can undertake audit work in and the type of work that we're able to deliver. In essence, what we're looking to do is to look at how individual public bodies use resources, and are they using them efficiently, effectively, and economically? And that's what is traditionally called value for money. Are you making the best return on the investment you're making in the services you provide? In terms of our work, that covers three things. We aim to assure people that public money is being well managed and spent, and that could be at a national level on a topic or within individual organisations. We also look to explain how public money is being used and how it meets people's needs. And then finally, through our recommendations, identify ways that services could be delivered differently. So I'm very aware in the conversations that have been held to date, how important this authority sees its use of resources, and hopefully the work we're undertaking will be something that can supplement some of the difficult decisions you have to make. So I'll hand over to Eros now. We'll run through in a bit more detail the specifics of this particular piece of work.
Diolch, Nick. Pnawn da. So our performance review with the authority this year is, as the Chief mentioned, is looking at reducing the number of false fire alarms that you respond to. So first things first, in terms of defining false fire alarms, they're grouped quite broadly into three categories, and they are fairly self-explanatory. So malicious calls are those made with the intention of getting the fire service to respond in the knowledge that there is no fire. Good intent calls are those made in good faith that a response would be needed, but in fact did not. And the third, and probably the biggest category, is around due to apparatus. So a call initiated by fire alarm equipment or firefighting equipment. That includes accidental initiation by people. And just a note on the terminology here, you may be familiar or perhaps more familiar with the term unwanted fire signals, and that essentially is a false alarm that the service hears about. So false alarms, I guess, is a broader term in that respect. But rightly or wrongly, I think both are often used quite interchangeably. But that is the distinction that's worth making as well. Our key lines of inquiry for this particular review is looking at whether or not the authority is doing all it can to reduce the prevalence and responses to non-domestic false fire alarms. And that focus on non-domestic very much came about through discussions with colleagues at North Wales it's felt to be a bit more helpful, I think, than looking at false alarms across the board. And the 4 sub-questions that we have to help us answer that very overall kind of audit question is looking firstly at whether the authority has a good understanding of the issue at hand. So looking at the locations, the causes and impacts of false alarms. Secondly, looking then at whether the authority has a clear approach and a policy and a plan in place to get to grips and address the issue. Thirdly, looking at arrangements to evaluate and monitor performance, and then finally looking at impact then, whether the authority is actually making a reduction and able to demonstrate that, or if not, why. A bit of background then in terms of the national perspective on this issue. The national framework has been in place for a number of years now, and obviously in the process of being redesigned. But this is the national framework that is currently in place, and that sets out Welsh Government's expectation that authorities will look to reduce the number of false fire alarms that they respond to by, well, first I guess identifying the main sources of false alarms and take steps then to reduce their incidence. And it does also look to, I guess that the capacity that might be generated from that process. It does highlight the need to redeploy that those resources to more predictive tasks in terms of the wording in the national framework. We've included some of the data in our terms of reference shared with the authority back in July. As authorities do report on this nationally. So this is some of the data that's published on Welsh Government's website. We've taken that 2007-08 year as, I guess, the first year just before austerity measures brought in, and then the last 3 or 4 years then has included going back to 2018-19. And that shows you the picture in terms of the number against the broad categories that we touched on. And in terms of non-domestic false fire alarms, which is the focus of our review, we are very much looking at that third row there, which is the number of false alarms due to apparatus, and that is, as you can see, quite a significant number there when you compare it to the other 2 groups. I should highlight that these are the national figures, by the way, across all 3 authorities. In terms of our methodology to answer that review question, well, we've concluded a series of interviews with officers and members in the last few weeks. We're also working on data and document reviews and a number of interviews with partner organisations as well. We have also launched a survey of buildings and facilities managers across Wales, because this is a review that we're doing across all 3 fire and rescue service areas, and very much welcome any support officers can provide in terms of promoting that amongst colleagues in the region across the north. In terms of timescales and clearance and next steps, I'll just hand back to Nick quickly to talk us through that and the next steps as well, and welcome any questions from members as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Ross. So in terms of the fieldwork with North Wales Fire and Rescue, we've completed our local interviews and met with a range of officers and some members. As Ross said, we currently have a survey live with partner organisations, facilities managers, and we're meeting with a number of bodies across Wales to encourage participation in the survey. And this is intended to give us a real sense, I guess, of how well they can support you to lower the number of unwanted fire signals. We're aiming to produce a draft report, which we will send to the Chief Fire Officer at the end of January, early February, and we'll then consider any comments that are provided on the tone, accuracy and balance of the report. And then we'll be looking to finalise our work in March 2023. And we would then bring the report back to the audit committee, and we'll be at that time happy to take any questions or observations from members. So that's a very quick run through the intention of the work and where we're up to at this stage. And as Eros said, we're happy to take any questions from members in the meeting.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Eros, for the presentation. And just to make members aware that the Deputy Chair myself have been interviewed by Nick and Eros as part of the review. I don't know if anybody has any comments or questions. can't see any hands raised, so the recommendation is that we just note the purpose of the review and that the main questions the review seeks to answer and the timescales for the review. Can I have somebody propose that we accept those recommendations? Thank you, Deputy Chair. Seconded? Thank you, Gareth. Can you show that you approve the recommendation, please? Thank you, everybody. So that's passed. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Avos. You're obviously welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. So going on to the next item on the agenda, which is number 7, the biodiversity report. ACFO Stuart Millington. Stuart, over to you. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr.
Chair. I'm going to hand over to Area Manager Anthony Jones to take us through this item. Thank you.
Pnawn da aelodau, Anthony Jones dwi'n bennaeth gweithrediadau sy'n cynnwys â amgylchwedd. Dwi'n dysgu Cymraeg, felly am droed at y Saesneg. Diolch. Good afternoon, members. My name is Anthony Jones. I'm Head of Operations, which includes the environment. As I'm learning Welsh, I'm going to carry on in English. Thank you. The report addresses North Wales Fire and Rescue Services Authority's compliance with Section 6 of the Environmental Wales Act 2016. It provides information on proposed future planning and reporting of the actions by the authority in relation to improving biodiversity within its estate. The authority is required for and reports on its actions to improve biodiversity within its estate, and this report represents and presents a draft biodiversity report and action plan for 2022 for approval to be published on the authority's website by the end of December 2022, and this is in accordance with the Act. In a way of summarising the report, we are required to report every 3 years. This is our second report, and as I mentioned, it must be published by the end of this calendar year. During 2019 and 22, the reporting period, the actions we've undertaken to note are an Environmental Action Day in Dolgellau, arson prevention and hydroseeding activity protecting vital biodiversity habitat following the Llantysilio fire and on Ruragon Mountains, and that was in partnership with Natural Resources Wales and North Wales Police. Our ground maintenance regime has been amended at 8 of our stations to allow undisturbed habitats for insects, allowing it through their breeding cycle. And we've also introduced swift boxes at Harlech Fire Station. In relation to our proposed actions for 22 to 25, the next reporting period, we continue our commitment to our biodiversity protection principles in the new environmental strategy and environmental management system. In relation to any of our new builds or major refurbishments, we aim to meet the good or excellent BREEAM certification standard. We intend to continue our ground maintenance regime. We will be replacing all of our classification 6 and classification 8 firefighting foam. This is to meet new legislation coming into effect at the end of this year, and we are ahead of our commitment in taking a proactive stance in this regard. And we also intend to continue our arson prevention work with our partners, such as Natural Resources Wales and North Wales Police. So members are asked, the recommendation is members are asked to approve the content of the attached biodiversity report and action plan for 2022, for it to be incorporated into publication on the authority's website before the end of December 2022, and this report will then come to full fire authority in January 2023. Thank you. Diolch.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for your presentation. A da iawn yn dysgu Cymraeg. As the chair, perhaps I could ask a question first, and then Councillor Gareth Sandilan wants to ask a question. But you mentioned about maintenance of sites, and obviously the service will have a number of sites all across North Wales. The Welsh Government's very keen on us planting trees at the moment. Are there any opportunities for us to plant trees at any of the sites to increase biodiversity?
Diolch, thank you, Chair. In relation to the land we own, the nature of our estate, we do have some small open areas. However, our land is a highly urbanised estate, and if you look at Table 1 in the report, you'll see how we've addressed that and highlight that. There is therefore the opportunity for us to plant trees is minimal. However, in an effort to improve our biodiversity, we do have options, such as allowing our green spaces to grow wild, adding things like log piles, bog hotels, and nesting boxes, all of which our new environmental and sustainability group, led by our new environment and climate change manager, are proactively employing.
Thank you for that, Anthony. Councillor Gareth Sandows. Gareth?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really interesting report to read. How diverse the fire authority is in what we do. It would be great if we can invite schools and youth groups along when we're doing these projects in an effort to integrate with young people. I think there's a lot of also publicity out of that, and how we integrate, how we can get on with the Environment and the Younger Future Generations Act. But out of interest, you mentioned about the trees all over Wales. That also actually includes wildflowers in that target. Wildflowers are actually classified as trees for some reason. We've got a Green Gate farm where an estate where we're planting 20,000 a year. We're going to have trees coming out of Denbighshire to supply the other authorities with, and I'm sure the fire authority could be one of those things that we supply in Denbighshire. But certainly invite the young people, because I think working in partnership we can get some more objectives sorted with that. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Gareth. Any other comments or questions from any of the members? I don't see any other hands raised, so you've heard what the recommendation is. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Ken Taylor, thank you. And the seconder? Thank you, Deputy Chair. Will you indicate that you approve the recommendations, please? Diolch yn fawr, thank you very much. So we go on to item number 8, which is the Manchester Arena inquiry. And this is a verbal report from ACFO Stuart Millington. Stuart, back to you again. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Members will recall the terrorist attack that took place at the end of the Ariana Grande concert that claimed 22 lives and severely injured more than 100 others at the Manchester Arena on the 22nd of May 2017. And since then, there's been extensive scrutiny, not only with regards to the sequence of events that led to that attack, but also about the multi-agency emergency response. Soon after the attack, the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, commissioned Lord Kerslake to complete an independent review into the preparedness and response to the Manchester Arena attack. And in March 2018, the review report that's now referred to as the Kerslake report was published. This made 29 recommendations. In North Wales, we examined our position against these recommendations and identified a number of specific activities that we needed to implement in order to make sure that we'd learned from the mistakes that were made in Manchester and we'd not be in a similar position if an attack were to take place in North Wales. Much of this work is continuous and requires regular refresher training to keep multi-agency emergency response skills as sharp as they can be. On the 22nd of October 2019, the Home Secretary established a public inquiry to investigate the deaths of the victims of the 2017 Manchester Arena attack, with hearings beginning on the 7th of September 2020. And then in June 2021, Volume 1 of the inquiry report was published. Volume 1 focused on security for the arena and made a number of recommendations, but none of these recommendations were applicable to fire and rescue services. On the 3rd of November this year, the second volume of the public inquiry was published, and this document focuses on the emergency response phase. Volume 2 consists of 916 pages and contains 149 recommendations, of which 21 are to be monitored. Of those 21, 4 were applicable to Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service directly, and 13 were considered to be multi-agency recommendations. Any recommendations made for specific organisations in inquiries of this type have a read across to the entire sector, and so can be considered to be relevant for all of our attention here in North Wales. There was a significant confusion on the night of the attack, and the communication breakdown between emergency services was at the heart of a series of problems that developed. The report has helped to contextualise these problems and has identified a number of events that became the catalyst for the larger problems that followed. Clearly, there are some areas of similarity with the Kerslake report, and as more than 5 years have passed since the attack, North Wales Fire and Rescue Service has made progress in a number of areas to learn from the terrible events that took place on that night in Manchester, but we must never be complacent. Recent exercises have taken place in other parts of the country and have identified that similar issues and confusion continue to be prevalent today. Failures in communication and difficulties in achieving shared situational awareness between emergency services continue to be highlighted as requiring improvement in many of the debriefs following these exercises. So what are the next steps? In a similar way for how we examined the Kerslake report in 2018, we've already begun to complete a gap analysis against the 149 recommendations through our established governance committee structure. The Organisational Learning Committee that I chair has commissioned our operational learning subgroup to complete the gap analysis and to produce an action plan for implementation of any changes to policy, training or equipment in order to ensure that our staff would be able to respond professionally and safely to any terrorist or large-scale multi-agency emergency incidents in North Wales. In addition to this, work will begin with partners through the local resilience forum to ensure that collectively we are as prepared as we can be. Also, work will commence from a national resilience perspective to ensure a consistent approach to terror attack response across Wales. Both the work with the local resilience forum and the national resilience work will result in increase in both physical on the boots on the ground and desktop multi-agency exercises, as well as an increased profile for regular multi-agency training. A progress report will be brought to a future authority meeting, and therefore, Chair, all that remains is for members to note this verbal update as a recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stuart, for that verbal update. And as you mentioned, that sadly that there was a breakdown in communications between the emergency services on the night in question. And we're fortunate here in North Wales that we actually have a joint communications centre between the fire service and the police service, which I'm sure is good practice. But as you said, we mustn't be complacent in relation to all the other issues. Councillor Ken Taylor, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Stuart, for that. Just interested to know, really, obviously the Home Office have a different levels of terrorist threats. Are you, as an authority, or all fire authorities, kept in that loop? And how regular is it, on a weekly basis or monthly or whatever? Just be interesting to know, really. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll come back. In relation to our relationship, we have a group of people, and they're referred to actually in the Manchester Arena report, and there's recent amendments around the role of somebody called a NILO, a National Interagency Liaison Officer. And that liaison officer has a higher level of security clearance than the average person, and is able to be kept up to date with any changes to the national threat assessment that takes place. And as and when any changes to that threat assessment are implemented, they're communicated through the NILO network. There's NILOs in the ambulance, there's people who have those skills in the police and awareness across the multi-agency perspective, and the fire service have a number of NILOs at both tactical and strategic level, as well as NILOs within our control room. We have a lead NILO, and ultimately any areas of update or awareness that come through that communication network are cascaded immediately that they arrive within the service to that entire network. So we're very much kept aware, and if there's anything that we need to do internally in terms of risk profile of buildings and so on, then that will be instigated through our NILO colleagues.
Thank you, Stuart.
So there we go. We've learned a new acronym for today, NILO. Any other comments or questions for Stuart? I can't see any. So can you just show that we agree to note the report, please? Thank you. And then going on to item number 9, which is again a verbal update, which is the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor's thematic review into operational training. And back to Deputy CFO Stuart Forshaw. Stuart, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members, on the 10th of October, for Social Partnership Anna Blyden made a statement to the Senate following the publication of the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor's review into training in the Fire and Rescue Service. The report is entitled Fire and Rescue Service Operational Training, a Thematic Review. The review includes an examination by the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor into a number of areas regarding operational training and starts with a consideration of the current arrangements and future options for the consideration of a strategic assessment of community risks to inform capability developments, which will in turn inform a training needs analysis in the Fire and Rescue Services of Wales. It then goes on to focus on the methodology adopted by Fire and Rescue Services in Wales, primarily for determining, oh, excuse me, I just noticed my camera's going off, sorry, technical error. I'll start again. It then goes on to focus on the methodology adopted by the Fire and Rescue Services in Wales, primarily for determining the allocation of time for training and exercising within fire station work routines and the retained duty system. The maintenance of competence of core skills for firefighters and additional skills areas are also included, with consideration for the initial skills acquisition and progression from development to competence for a firefighter following them joining the Fire and Rescue Service. The 8 core skill areas that the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor has considered in his review include breathing apparatus, casualty care, command and control, hazardous materials, pumps, knots, ladders and lines, road traffic collision training, safe working at height and water incidents. He's also looked at the balance between theoretical training and the use of micro teachers, and practical training is considered, with questions asked of the Fire and Rescue Services to identify the control measure tactics and techniques delivered following operational risk assessments into our initial operational response capability across the full range of likely incident types in any given station area, up to the amount of time available for training on all of our duty systems, and in particular the retained duty system. The review also looks at training venues and the impact of travel distances for firefighters when attending training events. References made to our own BA training facility in Dolgellau being a considerable distance from all of our large population centres in North Wales, something touched on in an earlier report. In this section, it concludes that the most appropriate solution for a training development centre would be to have a hub and spoke approach that would combine existing facilities at our fire stations with new live fire training facilities, though the need for substantial capital investment by fire authorities is recognised. Finally, the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor observed that in his opinion, compartment fire behaviour training does not reflect real-life fire conditions, and the tactics and techniques included in compartment fire behaviour training should be reviewed and incorporated in light of international research. The report concludes with 6 recommendations, which include the areas I've discussed, and in response to the review, all the recommendations have been included in an action plan that will be considered and managed through our North Wales Fire and Rescue Service Organisational Learning Committee, which Assistant Chief Fire Officer Millington mentioned he chairs. The Chief Fire Officer has provided a detailed response to the review to the Deputy Minister, as requested, with our plans for addressing the recommendations, with a copy of our action plan included. And this has now been acknowledged, but in the Deputy Minister's oral statement to the Senate on the 22nd of November, which was entitled Fire Service Training and Capacity to Broaden the Role. And as the Chair mentioned earlier, we've also received a letter from her recently. So that concludes my update, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Stuart, for that update report. Are there any questions or comments for Stuart? No. Oh, Chief wants to come in. Thank you, Chief.
Just to confirm, I think this is an area that the Deputy Minister is focusing on, and she recognises the health and safety issues around firefighter training, and it's something that she certainly won't let go. So we'll need to be reporting back on the progress on that. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Chief. And I don't want to revisit a previous agenda item, but obviously increased training means increased budget costs, but there we go. Can members show that they accept the report, the verbal report? Thank you. That's great. Thank you very much, Stuart. So going on to item number 10, which is the Cyber Essentials Report, and over to ACFO Richard Fairhead. Pnawn da, Richard.
Pnawn da, Cadeirydd, pnawn da, aelodau. Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So the purpose of this paper is to inform members of some of the work the service is doing regarding cyber security. North Wales Fire and Rescue Service is no different to all other organisations in being subject to the constant threat from cyber criminals trying to attack our computer systems. And our IT department spend an awful lot of time on a daily basis identifying these attacks and stopping all sorts of threats from entering our systems. It's a continuous process where they stop these attacks and spend a considerable amount of time and commit a significant amount of resources daily working to protect our systems. So if we look at the graphs that are on the second page of the report, they show some of the extent of the problem and the amount of work the department have had to do to protect our systems from cyber threats since May this year. And as you can see, the ICT department have identified 39 viruses and prevented them from infecting our systems, but they've also identified and dealt with over 6,000 threats, therefore preventing them from entering our systems. The staff in the ICT department are constantly updating the firewalls, which are programs which monitor and manage the IT traffic to ensure that they continue to be effective. And a firewall can be likened to the virtual erection of steel cages over each one of our computers, stopping viruses and threats entering the systems. The risk of not doing this work could have some catastrophic effects. If cyber criminals were able to access our command and control system, for instance, that might mean we would stop being able to mobilize fire engines to fires or other emergencies. If they accessed our data systems and used that personal data and leaked it, then we could be fined up to 20 million euros. If cyber criminals were able to access our systems with ransomware, then we'd have to spend an awful lot of money and an awful lot of time reinstating our systems, and that would clearly then cause some reputational damage, as would any impact or any time that we were attacked and successfully attacked by cyber criminals. One initiative which we are following is one which was designed by the National Cyber Security Centre, and it's known as Cyber Essentials. This has been designed to help organisations with dealing with the ever-growing threats of cyber attacks. And the Welsh Government encourage all public sector in Wales, organisations in Wales, to meet the CE standard while working towards Cyber Essentials Plus, which is a more in-depth assessment. So we're working to achieve Cyber Essentials certification, which involves a self-assessment, following which we'll work towards preparing for an independent external assessment to achieve Cyber Essentials Plus. To achieve Cyber Essentials Plus, however, it will require investment, both in technology and staff time, and probably a member of staff who will have to constantly be working and solely working on cyber security. Cyber Essentials, however, is something which we're taking the same route. The other two services in Wales, the other two fire and rescue services, are also working towards. So we're working towards to get that level of security which gives some assurance to the authority that we're protecting our systems. And the other two services are working with us in using that as a stepping stone to move on to achieving Cyber Essentials Plus. There are some organisations which, because of their work and the sensitive data that they hold, so for instance, North Wales Police, they actually have to hold Cyber Essentials Plus. But of course, we have a good working relationship with North Wales Police, so we can do some of the exploration of what we'll need to do to get Cyber Essentials Plus by speaking to our colleagues in the ICT department of North Wales Police. So we're going to continue to invest the time and resources to protect the service, and then for us to get that Cyber Essentials certification. And that offers that independent assurance that serious measures have taken place to protect our systems and provide us with information on potential areas for improvement. So that's a whistle-stop tour of Cyber Essentials and where we are. So I'd just like the members to note the work carried out by the service on cyber protection, including the fact that we are working towards Cyber Essentials certification in the first instance. Diolch yn fawr. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Gareth Sunderland's had his hand up first, then Councillor Ken Taylor. Thanks, Gareth.
Yeah, thank you. It was the implications I was looking at. I have no problem with the cost it says in the budget box. The staffing, it says a dedicated resource member needed. Is that extra? And what is the cost of that member of staff? Because a member of staff to look at cyber security is like £30,000 to £40,000, and that's considerable when you consider it. You know, so I've no problem with the 2,700, but when it comes to the dedicated support member, that's quite a considerable cost that we've not really specified clearly.
It is, and if we were going to go for Cyber Essentials Plus now, then we would have to have a member of staff dedicated solely on that work. What we're able to do at the moment is work.
Sorry, so that would be if that would be a new wage, then that would be a considerable cost then.
Or we would have to move that person from another, divide up some of the work that the ICT department are doing. Currently, we've got several members of the ICT department who are able to use their skills over some of the systems that they're controlling and they're managing. So, for instance, we've got somebody who oversees the command and control system, and they're able to do, with some of their work, they're able to protect that system. And then we have the ICT department who are protecting all of it. So we have one person who spends a lot of time doing that. If we were doing Cyber Essentials, we would envisage that one person, it would be solely their job.
Yeah, the reason why I ask is I've got a friend who works for central government as a contractor. They don't actually have it within house. They contract it out as they find it cheaper. And also I've met the guys down in Swansea, I think it is, in Cyber Essentials headquarters, they're part of the police. And yeah, I would imagine that we need to look at contracting sometimes for this specialist knowledge, and it would work out a bit cheaper. But no, I prefer it if the cost element was put into the staffing box next time, if anything like this does come across. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, noted, Councillor.
Before Ken comes in, Chief, did you want to speak?
Yes, I think what Richard was trying to explain was that we have taken the deliberate decision not to pursue Cyber Essentials Plus at this point in time, precisely to save on the cost of that dedicated post, and that we were bringing this to members so that you were aware that we were undertaking Cyber Essentials, but not Cyber Essentials Plus at this moment in time, precisely because of the cost.
Thank you, Chief. And just to remind members that we do have a corporate risk register, and cyber security is one of those areas that is flagged up as very high risk. Councillor Ken Taylor. Ken, diolch.
Diolch, Cadeirydd. Diolch, Richard. Perhaps I'm a bit naive in asking this, but what do these people hope to gain from infiltrating the fire service or maybe the NHS? I can sort of understand them wanting to infiltrate the police force, but you know, any thoughts on that? I'm just wondering, what do they gain from it?
Apologies, Councillor Taylor, I didn't catch the first bit of your question.
Yeah, you know, what do these people, whoever they are, hope to gain from infiltrating the police force, the fire service, possibly the NHS as well? I can understand them wanting, you know, to infiltrate the police force, but what do they hope to gain? What are they after? You know, I'm just wondering.
Yeah, well, certain things like ransomware, basically they will infiltrate the system, they'll lock the system down, and then they'll contact the organisation to say, if you want us to unlock it, then it's going to cost you a substantial amount of money. So that's one of the things they do. The other thing is they can sell people's personal data. So all our systems, which hold our staffing lists and payroll information, if somebody was able to steal that data and sell it on, It's that sort of thing. So there's that, and you know, why somebody would want to try and stop our command and control system working, I don't understand either. But it's a risk that we have to plan for.
Thank you, Richard. David, ti eisiau dod I fewn?
Ie, just efo atab Ken am yna ddeud y gwir, dyn nhw ddim yn pici am pwy maen nhw'n upsetio de. Maen nhw'n gallu mynd am wahanol gyrff yn hollol random braidd de. Mae yna ffrind I mi, Ian Williams, o'r Exam yn reiddiol, mae'n drysorydd yn Hackney Council yn Llundain, ac oedd Hackney I wneud yn ddrwg iawn efo hyn. I gath Parc Cenedlaethol Bannabrycheiniog, a maen nhw, sa chdi'n meddwl, yn llai tebygol fel corff o fod efo manylion fel yna. Ond maen nhw'n mynd am gyrff mawr a bach cyhoeddus yn eitha random, just lle maen nhw'n gweld gwendid can.
Diolch, David. I don't see any other hands raised, so can I have a proposer for the recommendation that we note the report, please? Thank you, Ken. Seconder? Thank you, Gareth. Can you show that you accept the recommendation? Diolch fawr, thank you. So going on to item number 11, we are heading towards the end. Review of, performance monitoring, quarters 1 and 2, and it's back to Deputy CFO Stuart Forshaw. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the purpose of this report is about incident activity during the first half of 22-23 financial year. Performance in relation to the authority's improvements and wellbeing objectives, and also other notable incident activity. So during the first half of the 22-23 year, the services attended just under 3,500 emergency incidents. This is an increase of around 26% compared to the same period last year. The increase has primarily been driven by an 81% increase in attendances at non-fire emergencies, which are classified as special service incidents. This follows the new Chief Fire Officer's change in policy around attendance at special service incidents, where we'd like to provide more assistance to the public and partner agencies, whilst at the same time increasing the visibility of North Wales Fire and Rescue Service within our communities. However, it is pleasing to see a reduction in the number of fires in the home that the services attended during the first half of the year. It's reduced from 208 to 161, and also along with no fire deaths in this period, and a small number of serious injuries too. However, conscious that this could change, the service will continue to deliver fire prevention interventions and initiatives to support fire safety in the home, as it continually does. Post-COVID increases in the in-person delivery of safe and well checks is also a positive outcome during the first half of the year, with a total of just over 9,000 safe and well checks completed. This is compared to just under 6,000 during the first half of the year last year. And we've got a commitment now to meet the end of year target of 20,000 safe and well checks by the end of the year. And the service will continue to positively increase the number of safe and well checks, working with partners to prioritise those at high risk of fire within their homes. A new area of reporting within this report for the executive panel is the number of wildfires that the service has attended. Wildfires can be a result of extreme weather events linked to climate change, and is an area of growth within the UK in comparison to the reduction of house fires during the past decade. Wildfires can be particularly challenging incidents for us to deal with because they're erratic in nature, they have a large scale size at times, their intensity can be large, and because of their rural and rural urban interface environments in which they tend to occur. As defined by the National Fire Chiefs Council, a wildfire is a grassland, woodland or crop fire that involves a geographical area of at least 1 hectare, has a sustained flame length of more than 1.5 meters, requires a committed resource of at least 4 fire and rescue appliances, fire engines, requires resource to be committed for at least 6 hours, and presents a serious threat to life, environment, property and infrastructure. And during the first half of this year, there were 54 wildfires recorded in North Wales, which were attended by a combined total of 356 vehicles for over 1,097 hours. This area of performance will continue to now be monitored and reported on future exec panel meetings. The mobilising rules implemented during the pandemic at HMB Berwyn and the fire safety advice delivered during this period will also continue, as this has resulted in a reduction of fires attended at the prison from 21 to 8 in the same period compared to last year. Following the service restructure from the 1st of April 2022, focus on the 20 fire station availability target has resulted in an increase of 172 days at 94%, which is compared to 77% during the first half of last year. This is another positive direction of travel, though it's early days and work will continue to recruit and retain firefighters at our retained fire stations. So looking at incidents in more detail, the upward trend in the number of incidents attended has continued, with 26% more incidents as mentioned. Although there have been increased attendances across all categories, the main contributor has been in special service incidents, with an 81.3% increase. And this was expected, as mentioned, following the change in service mobilisation procedures to increase our attendances at special service incidents. And more information for all the incidents the service attended during this period can be found on page 1 of the performance report. In relation to fires attended during the reporting period, this also increased by 22.7% compared to the same period last year. Grassland, woodland and crop fires included within those fires increased 79% from 230 to 412, and secondary accidental grassland, woodland and crop fires increased from 272 from 146, with heathland and moorland fires being the main contributor to this increase. Increases were also recorded in grassland pasture grazing, 46 to 84, hedge fires, 13 to 26, and tree and scrub, which includes single trees not in a garden, from 11 to 25. Secondary deliberate grassland, woodland and crop fires increased also by 52.6%, with the main contributors to this increase being grassland, pasture and grazing and tree scrub. As mentioned, there were 54 wildfires which were attended, and with 356 vehicles, and primary fires decreased slightly compared to the same quarter of 21-22, and were 3.2% below the 3-year average of 475. Accidental primary fires also decreased 6.8% from 398 to 371, with the main contributor to the decrease being a reduction in dwelling fires from 208 to 161. Although non-residential grassland, woodland and crop fires increased. Deliberate primary fires, which have been on a downward trend since 2018-19, did increase slightly compared to the same period last year, from 82 to 89. And more information on primary fires can be found on page 5 of the performance report. Secondary fires increased by 50% from 537 to 808, and this was primarily due to an increase in accidental secondary fires, with the main contributors again being outdoor, grassland, woodland and crop, and other outdoors. Deliberate secondary fires increased by 41.5%, and again this was due to an increase in outdoor, with grassland, woodland and crop fires being the main cause. Chimney fires, however, have been on a downward trend since 2020 to 21, and decreased further compared to the same period last year, from 38 to 26. In relation to accidental dwelling fires, the service attended 22.6 fewer accidental dwelling fires, 161 compared to 208 during the same period last year. And accidental dwelling fires in house of single occupancy, bungalow of single occupancy decreased from 118 to 93, and from 35 to 17 respectively. The main contributors to the decrease being combustible articles too close to the heat source, and cooking fires from 14 to 4. Faults in equipment and appliances also decreased from 20 to 13. And more information, including taken regarding accidental dwelling fires, can be found on page 6 and 7 of the performance report. As mentioned earlier, there were no fatalities in accidental dwelling fires compared with 3 during the same period last year. There were also a reduction in casualties from 66 to 47, with 2 people sustaining serious injuries and 19 sustaining slight injuries. More information on injuries during the period, including categories of injuries recorded over a 5-year period, can be found on page 8 of the performance report. When it comes to smoke detectors, they were present at the majority of accidental fires within dwellings at 88.2%. Accidental dwelling fires where the smoke and heat detector was fitted, operated and raised the alarm reduced, however, from 100 to 80 compared with the same period the previous year, in line with the date reduction of ADFs attended. Accidental dwelling fires where a smoke detector was fitted but did not operate decreased from 42 to 41. And the most likely reason for non-operation is being a detector being correctly installed on an escape route, so that's a hall or a landing, and not in a room most likely to be the origin of a fire, for example, a kitchen or living room. Accidental dwelling fires where no detector was fitted decreased from 26 to 19, and where a detector was fitted and operated but did not raise the alarm instance also decreased from 40 to 21. More information on smoke detector ownership and actions to increase the number of smoke detectors in the home can be found on page 8 and 9 of the performance report. As mentioned about deliberate fires in non-residential, deliberate primary fires in non-residential buildings declined from 36 to 28, with 8 occurring in the prison. Regarding false alarms, the upward trend in false alarms continued, with the service attending just under 1,500 false alarms. And this was 161 more than the same period last year, and more than the 3-year average. These originated from AFA systems and increased from 17.2% and represented 57% of false alarm attendances. Moving on into the report, malicious false alarms, there was a slight increase in malicious false alarms from 18 to 29, with the main contributor being an increase in dwelling fires, with activation of a call point and alarm increased from 5 to 21. And more information on false alarms and the work that the service is doing to reduce them, especially in non-domestic premises, which was presented earlier as part of the Audit Wales review, can be found on pages 10 and 11 of the report. Special service calls increased from 81.3%, and this was down to some of the reasons given earlier. And information on special service incidents can be found on page 12 and 13 of the report, as can information on road traffic collisions and attendances. They can be found on page 14 and 15 of the report. Mentioning safe and well checks earlier in the presentation, details on the number of safe and well checks across all priority categories over a 5-year period and actions taken in our prevention activities can be found on page 16 and 17 of the report. And the station performance, which is, as mentioned, is up, is contained within page 18 of the report. So the recommendation to members this afternoon is that you note the report and note the contents of the performance report, and I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Stuart, and really good news about the reduction in accidental dwelling fires. And just to sort of highlight to members that there are 2 management information sections in this report that we didn't have previously, namely more management information about wildfires in terms of sort of the resources that have to be utilised in attending wildfires, and also the station performance, which gives us details of how often we hit that target of minimum availability across the North Wales area. So very useful information has been added to the performance monitoring reports. Any questions or comments from members, please? Councillor Ken Taylor. Ken?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, Stuart. Is global warming a factor in wildfires, in the increase in wildfires?
Well, I suppose that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think climate change in general is a main contributor for a lot of the extreme weather events that we're experiencing, not only in North Wales, but across the whole of the world, really. So it's fair to say that I think climate change will have an impact on kind of the increase in wildfires that we are attending. But that's no reason not to do the proactive work that we are doing with landowners, National Resource Wales, some of the stuff that Ant included within his report earlier around our kind of sustainability work that we do want to do regarding biodiversity and sustainability in the future.
Any other questions or comments? I can see that some of the members are beginning to flag. Can I have a proposal that we accept the report, please? Deputy Chair, and thank you, Carol, for seconding. Will you show, please? Thank you, everybody. So the last item on this part of the agenda is item number 12, review of the improvement and wellbeing objectives in the authority's corporate plan 2021 to 24. And it's back to you again, Stuart, to continue, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and be as brief as possible. This report is to review the Fire and Rescue Authority's long-term objectives that are contained within our corporate plan 21 to 24. As members will know, we're required to publish improvement objectives in accordance with the local government measure and the wellbeing objectives in compliance with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And for the purposes of the authority's planning process, these are treated as one as the same. In March 2021, the authority published 7 long-term wellbeing objectives, and they are contained within our corporate plan 21-24. Every March, the Fire and Rescue Authority publishes a plan for the following financial year, setting out its agreed improvements and wellbeing objectives and outlining the actions it proposed to take towards achieving those objectives during the year. And the authority published its most recent update against the corporate plan in March of this year. Further to the annual review in March, the previous Fire and Rescue Authority approved a revised and updated corporate plan 21-24, which recognised the continuance of some of the actions into future years due to external factors influencing the rate of progress in some areas and the impact of embedding internal governance changes which were due to take effect from April. Although the relevant legislation does not stipulate how often a public body must change its objectives, there is a requirement to undertake an annual review of its wellbeing objectives to assess whether or not they're still relevant. And under the Act, the authority is required to review its objectives, but it does not have to change them. It should assess whether their objectives continue to be appropriate and consider to what extent they contribute to achieving the wellbeing goals for Wales, they're consistent with the Sustainable Development Principles, and the authority has taken all reasonable steps to meet those objectives. Members will remember that at the meeting in October of this year, the authority approved the annual performance assessments for 21-22 for the publication on the website, which has happened. And this assessment describes progress and achievements against last year in support of the authority's objectives. It also explains how each of the authority objectives contributes to achieving the wellbeing goals for Wales and is consistent with the Sustainable Development Principles. The annual performance assessment did not indicate a need to revise or change the existing set of long-term objectives. Therefore, over the coming months, officers will be revisiting the content of the authority's corporate plan 21-24 in order to update the list of planned actions underpinning each strategic objective. And to this end, the authority is asked to consider whether it wishes to continue to pursue the same long-term objectives next year, or alternatively to suggest changes that can be written to next year's updated version of the corporate plan. In 23-24, officers will also be engaging with the authority in relation to the next iteration of the corporate plan from 2024 onwards, with a view to evolving into a 5-year plan for 2024 to 29. So the recommendation, Chair, is that the authority confirms its intention to continue to pursue its existing 7 long-term objectives in 23-24 and requests an updated version of the corporate plan for 21-24 to be prepared by officers for approval at the meeting of the authority in April 2023. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Stuart. So do any of the members have any burning desire to change any of the existing 7 long-term objectives? I don't see anybody raising their hand. Can I invite you, therefore, to accept the recommendations as they are, as just outlined by Stuart? Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Ken Taylor, I think your hand's going up. The seconder, please. Thank you, Gareth. Will you show that you accept the recommendations? Diolch yn fawr, thank you. So that brings us to the end of part A of the agenda. The only item in part B is a verbal update on the industrial action situation. This is under part 2, and we need to agree that we close out the public to this discussion item. Do I have a proposer that we agree to close out the public for this part 2 item, please? Thank you, Carol. Can I have a seconder?